On a Tuesday morning in early May, the first sign that something was wrong was the silence. Eleanor Vance, a woman whose life was a study in precision and punctuality, had missed a critical client meeting. It was a meeting she had spent weeks preparing for, the capstone presentation for a community garden project that was her passion. What kind of emergency could have possibly kept her away? Her colleagues at the architectural firm where she worked tried her cell phone repeatedly. Each call went directly to voicemail, the same cheerful but professional greeting playing on a loop. By midday, a thread of concern had woven itself into the fabric of the workday. This was not just unusual, it was entirely out of character for the ever-reliable Eleanor. The firm's director, a man who viewed Eleanor as a protege, made the decision to call her apartment complex. He asked the building manager to perform a wellness check, hoping to hear that she had simply overslept or that her phone had died. The manager agreed, his tone suggesting this was a routine, if slightly bothersome, request. When the building manager used his master key to open the door to apartment 4B, he found nothing immediately amiss. The space was tidy, almost pristine, reflecting Eleanor's organized nature. Her keys were on the small dish by the door, and her purse was on the kitchen counter. Her car, a modest but well-maintained sedan, was still in its assigned spot in the parking garage. But Eleanor Vance was not there. The only thing out of place was a half-full mug of coffee on the kitchen counter, now cold to the touch. It suggested a morning routine that had been abruptly and inexplicably interrupted. The wellness check, intended to provide reassurance, had instead opened the door to a profound and unsettling mystery. With no other recourse, the building manager contacted the local police department. The call was logged as a missing person report, one of dozens the department received each week. Initially, it was not treated with a high degree of urgency. Eleanor was an adult with no known medical issues or history of erratic behavior. The prevailing assumption was that she had decided to take an unannounced break from her life for reasons of her own. The first officers to arrive at the apartment conducted a cursory search. They noted the lack of any signs of forced entry or struggle. There were no overturned chairs, no broken glass, no indication of a violent confrontation. To the uniformed officers, it looked as though the apartment's resident had simply stepped out for a moment and had not yet returned. They interviewed the building manager and a few neighbors, but no one had seen or heard anything unusual. Eleanor was described as a quiet, friendly neighbor who mostly kept to herself. She was a model tenant who paid her rent on time and never caused any trouble. Her life, it seemed, was as orderly as her apartment. By the end of the day, Eleanor's parents, who lived in a neighboring state, had been notified. Their initial worry quickly escalated to panic. They knew their daughter better than anyone, and they insisted that she would never leave without telling someone. She was the responsible one, the planner, the person who always had a color-coded schedule for everything. They told the police that Eleanor had been in high spirits when they had last spoken to her just 2 nights before. She had been excited about her presentation and was talking about her plans to eventually start her own landscape architecture firm. There was no hint of depression, no mention of any personal problems, and certainly no indication that she was planning to disappear. The following day, with Eleanor still missing and her family's pleas growing more desperate, the case was assigned to a pair of detectives from the missing persons unit. Detective Miller, a veteran with 20 years on the force, and his younger, more tech-savvy partner, Detective Chen, arrived at the apartment to conduct a more thorough investigation. They were tasked with finding answers where the initial officers had found only questions. Detectives Miller and Chen began by methodically walking through Eleanor's apartment, looking for the subtle clues their predecessors might have missed. They noted the half-finished coffee, the purse, and the keys. They also found her wallet inside her purse, containing her identification, credit cards, and a small amount of cash. Robbery, therefore, seemed an unlikely motive for her disappearance. Her cell phone was also missing, a detail that immediately struck the detectives as significant. In the modern world, a person's phone was their lifeline, a digital extension of themselves. Its absence suggested that either Eleanor had taken it with her or someone else had taken it from her. They immediately filed a request for a court order to obtain her phone records and location data from her service provider. They moved on to her bedroom. The bed was neatly made, another testament to her orderly habits. Her laptop was on her desk, open to a draft of the presentation she was supposed to have given. A quick check of her recent browser history showed searches related to native plant species and sustainable irrigation systems, all consistent with her work. There were no searches for bus schedules, train tickets, or new destinations. In the living room, they examined her mail, her calendar, and her personal planners. Everything pointed to a life that was moving forward, not one that was being abandoned. Her calendar was filled with appointments for the coming weeks, client meetings, a dentist appointment, and a weekend trip to visit her parents. She had just paid her rent and her utility bills for the month. The detective's initial theory, that Eleanor may have left voluntarily, was quickly eroding. The evidence in her apartment painted a picture of a woman who had been in the middle of her life, with no intention of leaving it. The scene was too normal, too peaceful. It was this very normality that made it so deeply disturbing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air from the center of her own well-ordered universe. Detective Chen began the process of building a timeline of Eleanor's last known movements. Her colleagues confirmed she had left work at approximately 5:30 in the evening on Monday. Security camera footage from her office building's lobby showed her leaving alone, looking tired but otherwise normal. She had waved to the security guard on her way out. Next, they checked the security footage from her apartment building. The cameras covering the entrance and the parking garage were functional, and the detectives settled in to review the recordings. They saw Eleanor's car pull into the garage just before 6 o'clock on Monday evening. Footage from the lobby showed her entering the building a few minutes later, carrying a bag of groceries. She entered the elevator alone and was not seen on the lobby cameras again. This confirmed that she had made it home safely on Monday night. The critical window of time was now narrowed to the period between her arrival at home and her missed meeting on Tuesday morning. What had happened within the walls of her own apartment building during those hours? The detectives requested the records for all key fob usage for the building's main entrance, garage, and stairwells. They wanted to know who had come and gone during that 16-hour window. The resulting data log was extensive, a list of hundreds of entries from the building's many residents. It would take time to cross-reference every entry with resident lists and visitor logs. While Chen worked on the digital footprint, Miller focused on the human element. He and other officers began a more systematic canvass of the apartment building. They re-interviewed residents, asking more pointed questions. Had they heard any arguments, any screams or sounds of a struggle? Had they seen Eleanor with anyone? Most residents reported hearing nothing out of the ordinary. The building had thick walls, and people generally kept to themselves. However, one resident on the same floor as Eleanor offered a small but potentially significant piece of information. An elderly woman who lived 2 doors down recalled hearing a raised voice from the hallway. Late on Monday night, sometime around 10 o'clock, she couldn't be sure where it had come from, and she couldn't make out any specific words. She described it as a male voice, sounding agitated or angry. It was brief, lasting only a moment, and she had dismissed it as a resident having a loud phone conversation. At the time, it had not seemed important enough to report. Now, in the context of a missing person case, it felt ominous. This sliver of information gave the detectives their first potential lead. It suggested that Eleanor may have had a visitor that night, and that the interaction may not have been friendly. The focus of the investigation shifted. They were no longer just looking for a missing woman. They were now actively searching for an unknown man who may have been the last person to see her. The detectives turned their attention to Eleanor's personal life, hoping to identify this mystery visitor. They spoke at length with her parents and her two closest friends. They asked for the names of anyone she had been dating, any recent romantic interests, and any ex-boyfriends. A name that came up immediately was Mark Renshaw. Mark and Eleanor had dated for 2 years and had broken up about 6 months prior to her disappearance. According to her friends, the breakup had been difficult and acrimonious. Mark had reportedly had trouble accepting the end of the relationship and had sent Eleanor a series of angry text messages in the weeks that followed. Her friends described him as possessive and having a quick temper. Suddenly, the agitated male voice in the hallway had a potential name attached to it. Mark Renshaw became the investigation's first person of interest. Detectives Miller and Chen located his address and drove to his apartment to question him. They found him at home, and his surprise at seeing 2 detectives at his door appeared genuine. When they informed him that Eleanor was missing, Mark's reaction was one of shock and concern. He asked what had happened and when she had last been seen. He told the detectives that he hadn't spoken to Eleanor in months, not since she had made it clear she wanted no further contact. He admitted that the breakup had been hard on him, but insisted he had moved on. The detectives asked him to account for his whereabouts on Monday night. Mark stated that he had been working late at his job as a graphic designer, trying to meet a deadline. He claimed he had left his office around 9:30 in the evening and had gone straight home, where he had remained for the rest of the night, alone. It was a plausible story, but one that needed to be verified. Miller asked Mark if he would be willing to come to the station for a more formal interview and to provide a voluntary DNA sample. Mark agreed without hesitation, saying he would do anything to help find Eleanor. His cooperative attitude was noted by the detectives, but they remained skeptical. They knew from experience that a willingness to cooperate was not always an indicator of innocence. While Mark was being interviewed at the station, other officers were dispatched to his workplace to verify his alibi. They spoke with his supervisor and several co-workers, who all confirmed that Mark had indeed been at the office late on Monday night. Key fob data from his office building corroborated his story, showing him leaving at 9:41 in the evening. Furthermore, security footage from a convenience store near his apartment showed him purchasing a sandwich and a drink at 10 o'clock that night. The timing made it highly unlikely that he could have traveled to Eleanor's apartment, had a confrontation, and then returned to his neighborhood in time to be captured on that camera. His alibi appeared to be solid. The DNA sample Mark provided was processed and compared against the minimal evidence collected from Eleanor's apartment. As expected, since there were no signs of a struggle, there was no foreign DNA to compare it to. Mark Renshaw, the promising first lead, had turned into a frustrating dead end. The unknown man with the agitated voice remained a ghost. Meanwhile, the cell phone records had come in. They showed that Eleanor's phone had last pinged a cell tower near her apartment building shortly after 11 o'clock on Monday night. After that, the phone was either turned off or its battery had died. There were no outgoing calls or texts after she had arrived home from work. The records did show one incoming call around 10:15 that night. The call had lasted for less than a minute. The number was not saved in Eleanor's contacts, but a reverse lookup traced it to a burner phone, a prepaid mobile phone that was virtually untraceable. This discovery was a chilling development. It suggested a degree of premeditation and a conscious effort to avoid being identified. The investigation was now at a critical juncture. The easy leads had been exhausted, and the trail was growing cold. The detectives had a missing woman, a potential witness who had heard a brief argument, and an untraceable phone call. It was a collection of disparate facts that refused to form a coherent picture of what had happened to Eleanor Vance. Public awareness of the case began to grow. News outlets picked up the story, and Eleanor's smiling face was soon featured on local television broadcasts and websites. Her family made an emotional public plea for her safe return, their faces etched with grief and desperation. They announced a reward for any information leading to her whereabouts. The police department organized volunteer search parties. Hundreds of concerned citizens, friends, and colleagues fanned out across the city's parks, wooded areas, and waterways. They searched for days, combing through dense underbrush and along riverbanks, hoping to find any sign of Eleanor. They found nothing. The city, it seemed, had swallowed her whole. Weeks turned into a month, and the investigation stagnated. Detectives Miller and Chen had interviewed dozens of people, from Eleanor's distant relatives to the delivery person who brought her groceries. They had meticulously analyzed her financial records, her social media activity, and her personal emails. They found no secret debts, no hidden relationships, no online correspondence with strangers. Her life appeared to be exactly what it seemed on the surface: quiet, professional, and focused. This lack of any obvious turmoil or conflict in her life made her disappearance all the more baffling. She was not the type of person who would be involved in risky behavior or associate with dangerous people. She was, by all accounts, a victim who had done nothing to invite her fate. The detectives kept returning to the untraceable phone call. It felt like the key, the one piece of the puzzle that didn't fit with the rest of Eleanor's life. Who would have contacted her using a burner phone, and why? It hinted at a secret side of her life that even her closest friends and family were unaware of. Or, more ominously, it suggested she was targeted by someone who knew exactly how to cover their tracks. Another person who was interviewed extensively during this period was Julian Croft. Julian was a close friend and a former colleague of Eleanor's. They had met at her previous job and had bonded over a shared interest in urban green spaces. He was charismatic and well-liked, and he had been working with Eleanor on the community garden project that she was so passionate about. Julian presented himself as being devastated by Eleanor's disappearance. He was one of the most active participants in the volunteer searches and frequently called the detectives for updates on the case. He spoke eloquently about Eleanor's talent and kindness, painting a picture of a dear friend who had been unjustly taken. He told the detectives that he had last spoken with Eleanor on Monday afternoon to go over some final details for her presentation. He said the call was brief and entirely work-related. His phone records confirmed this. When asked about his whereabouts on Monday night, he said he had been at home with his wife, and she readily confirmed his alibi. Julian seemed to be a pillar of support for Eleanor's grieving family and friends. He organized a candlelight vigil and helped set up a fundraising page to increase the reward money. No one had any reason to suspect him of anything. He was simply a good friend, doing everything he could to help in a terrible situation. The detectives saw him as a valuable witness, not a potential suspect. As the summer wore on, the case gradually faded from the headlines. The search parties became smaller and less frequent. The tip line, which had once been flooded with calls, fell silent for days at a time. For the detectives, the active, day-to-day investigation wound down, and the case file was moved from the top of the pile to a cabinet filled with other unsolved cases. It had not officially gone cold, but a chilling stillness had settled over it. Detective Miller, however, could not let it go. He kept Eleanor's picture pinned to the corkboard above his desk. He would often pull out the file late at night, rereading the witness statements and staring at the timeline, convinced that they had missed something. The case haunted him, a silent testament to a life interrupted and a puzzle unsolved. The seasons changed. Fall arrived, painting the city in shades of red and gold. Then winter came, blanketing the landscape in snow. The case of the missing architect, Eleanor Vance, became a piece of local lore, a cautionary tale whispered among neighbors. For her family, however, the pain remained raw and immediate. Every holiday, every birthday, was a fresh reminder of the empty space she had left behind. Then, nearly 10 months after Eleanor had vanished, a breakthrough occurred, though it was a grim one. A pair of hikers exploring a remote, densely wooded state park about 50 miles from the city stumbled upon what appeared to be human remains. They had wandered off the main trail, following a deer path, when they made the discovery in a shallow grave, hastily concealed with leaves and branches. They immediately contacted the park rangers, who in turn notified the state police. A forensics team was dispatched to the remote location. The area was cordoned off, and a meticulous excavation began. The remains were carefully unearthed and transported to the medical examiner's office for identification. Dental records confirmed what the detectives had long feared. The remains belonged to Eleanor Vance. The search was over. The missing person case had now officially become a homicide investigation. The question was no longer where she was, but who had put her there. The autopsy revealed that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. She had been killed an or around the day of her disappearance. The discovery of her body, while tragic, re-energized the investigation. It provided a crucial piece of evidence, the location where her killer had chosen to hide her. Detectives returned to the state park with renewed purpose. They searched the area around the gravesite for any additional evidence that might have been left behind. They were looking for anything: a footprint, a tire track, a dropped button, a stray fiber that could link a suspect to the scene. The remote and rugged terrain, however, made the search incredibly difficult. After days of painstaking work, the search team found something. Partially buried in the mud a few yards from the grave was a small, tarnished piece of metal. It was a cufflink, elegant and understated in its design. It was not the kind of thing one would expect to find in the middle of the woods. It was a clue, the first tangible piece of evidence they had found in months. Section S. The cufflink was sent to the crime lab for analysis. Forensic technicians carefully cleaned it and searched for any trace evidence. They found no usable fingerprints or DNA on the object itself. However, the design was distinctive. It featured a small, stylized compass rose. The detectives hoped that it might be traceable to a specific jeweler or brand. They began the laborious process of showing the cufflink to jewelers and clothing retailers throughout the region. For weeks, they came up empty. The design was generic enough that no one could definitively identify its origin. It was another promising lead that seemed to be fizzling out. With the discovery of the body, the case was once again in the news. The media coverage brought a renewed, albeit small, flurry of tips to the police hotline. Most were well-intentioned, but ultimately unhelpful. However, one call stood out. A woman called to report something she had seen on the night Eleanor disappeared, something she had dismissed at the time, but now felt might be important. The caller was a long-haul truck driver who frequently parked her rig overnight in an industrial area on the outskirts of the city. This area happened to be adjacent to the main highway that led towards the state park where Eleanor's body was found. She reported seeing a car, a dark-colored sedan, parked on a deserted service road late that Monday night. She remembered it because it was an unusual place for a car to be at that hour. She saw a man standing next to the vehicle with the trunk open. He seemed to be moving something heavy and awkward from his trunk into the dense woods that bordered the road. In the dim light from her cab, she couldn't make out many details, but she remembered the man seemed frantic and was working quickly. At the time, she had assumed it was someone illegally dumping trash and hadn't given it a second thought. But now, with the news that a body had been found in that direction, her memory of the strange event took on a sinister new meaning. She couldn't provide a license plate number or a clear description of the man. But she did remember one detail about the car. It had a faulty tail light that flickered. This new information gave the detectives a specific geographical area to focus on for the night of the murder. They began to cross-reference this with their existing list of potential suspects and persons of interest. They re-examined Mark Renshaw's alibi, but his location had been confirmed, far from the industrial area. They were still hunting for a ghost. The investigation into the cufflink continued. Detective Chen, unwilling to give up, expanded the search online. He spent hours scouring e-commerce sites, forums for collectors, and digital archives of jewelry catalogs. Finally, he got a hit. He found a matching cufflink for sale on a vintage collectibles website. The listing identified it as part of a limited edition set, given as a corporate gift by a regional bank 5 years earlier. This was a major breakthrough. The bank was a high-end financial institution that catered to wealthy clients. The detectives obtained a list of the employees and top-tier clients who had received the gift set. The list was long, containing over 200 names. It would be a daunting task to investigate each person on it. They began the slow process of cross-referencing the names on the bank's list with the names in their case file. They were looking for any connection, however tenuous, to Eleanor Vance. They checked for friends, family members, colleagues, and neighbors. After days of painstaking work, they found a match. The name on the list was Julian Croft. The revelation sent a shockwave through the investigative team. Julian Croft, the helpful and grieving friend, the man who had organized the candlelight vigil, was now their primary suspect. His carefully constructed facade of the concerned friend began to crumble, revealing something much darker beneath. The detectives looked at Julian in a new light. His constant calls for updates, which they had once seen as a sign of his concern, now seemed like an attempt to monitor their investigation. His active participation in the searches could have been a way to steer volunteers away from the area where he had hidden the body. His public displays of grief appeared to be a calculated performance. They immediately placed Julian under covert surveillance. They wanted to build a stronger case before confronting him. They delved back into his life, this time looking for cracks in his perfect image. They pulled his financial records, his work history, and his phone records again, now searching for inconsistencies and hidden motives. What they found was staggering. Far from being the successful professional he appeared to be, Julian Croft was in serious financial trouble. He had significant credit card debt, a second mortgage on his house, and a series of failed private investments. He was living far beyond his means, and the pressure was mounting. He was on the verge of financial ruin. The detectives then uncovered a direct financial link between Julian and Eleanor. Eleanor, who had been frugal and a diligent saver, had recently lent Julian a substantial amount of money, $50,000. She had told her parents it was a short-term loan to help a friend with a business investment. She had trusted him completely. The loan was supposed to have been repaid weeks before her disappearance, but Julian had repeatedly made excuses. The detectives found a series of text messages between them in the days leading up to her murder. Eleanor had become increasingly insistent that he repay the loan, as she needed the capital to start her own firm. Her tone had shifted from friendly to firm. The final text she sent him on Monday afternoon read, "We need to sort this out tonight, Julian. No more delays." This was the motive they had been searching for. Julian Croft, facing financial collapse and unable to repay the loan, had decided that murder was the only way out of his debt. He had silenced his creditor permanently. The agitated male voice in the hallway, the untraceable burner phone call to lure her to the door or arrange a meeting. It all started to fit together. They also re-examined his alibi for the night of the murder. His wife had claimed he was home with her all night. When detectives approached her again, this time armed with their new evidence and the knowledge of his financial desperation, her story began to falter. Under pressure, she admitted that Julian had left the house for several hours on Monday night. She claimed he had told her he was going to a late-night meeting with an investor. He had returned well after midnight, seeming agitated and covered in dirt. He had immediately removed his clothes and put them in the washing machine. At the time, she had accepted his story, not wanting to believe anything was wrong. Now, she was forced to confront the terrible truth. Her husband was not the man she thought he was. With his alibi shattered and a clear motive established, the detectives had enough to obtain a search warrant for Julian Croft's home and vehicle. The search of his house yielded another crucial piece of evidence. Tucked away in the back of his closet, in a box of old belongings, they found the mate to the cufflink discovered in the woods. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with the forensic examination of his car. Although he had cleaned it thoroughly, the crime lab's technicians were able to find microscopic traces of soil in the trunk. Under analysis, the soil composition was found to be a perfect match for the unique soil from the remote gravesite in the state park. They also discovered a single strand of hair, wedged deep in the trunk's lining, that DNA testing confirmed belonged to Eleanor Vance. The case against Julian Croft was now overwhelming. Detectives Miller and Chen arrested him at his office, in full view of his colleagues. His mask of composure finally broke. The charismatic and confident man was replaced by a pale, trembling figure as the handcuffs were placed on his wrists. He was charged with the murder of Eleanor Vance. During his interrogation, Julian Croft remained defiant, denying any involvement. He tried to portray himself as the victim of a terrible misunderstanding. But as the detectives laid out the evidence against him, piece by piece, the financial motive, the broken alibi, the cufflink, the soil samples, the hair, his denials became weaker and less convincing. The trial was a media sensation. The prosecution presented a meticulous and damning case, detailing Julian's calculated deception. They argued that he had gone to Eleanor's apartment that night, under the pretense of repaying her. When she realized he had no money, an argument had ensued. He had then attacked her, killing her in her own home. He had then wrapped her body in a blanket or rug and transported her to the state park, a place he knew from his hiking hobby. He had used a burner phone to make the initial call to her that night, to ensure the conversation was not traced back to him. The flickering taillight on his car, a detail provided by the truck driver, was also confirmed by maintenance records from his mechanic. Julian's defense team tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial. They attempted to discredit the witnesses and cast doubt on the forensic findings. But the sheer weight of the evidence was too much to overcome. The jury saw through his lies and his performance of grief. After several weeks of testimony, the jury returned its verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Julian Croft was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, he showed no emotion, his face a cold, blank mask. The man who had been able to feign such deep sorrow for his friend seemed incapable of feeling any remorse for his actions. In the aftermath, those who had known both Eleanor and Julian were left to grapple with the shocking betrayal. He had not only taken her life, but had also desecrated her memory by pretending to mourn alongside those who truly loved her. He had exploited their grief and trust in the most cynical way imaginable. Eleanor Vance's family finally had justice, but it was a cold comfort. It could not bring back their daughter. At the sentencing hearing, her mother read a victim impact statement, her voice shaking with emotion. She spoke of Eleanor's kindness, her passion for her work, and the bright future that had been stolen from her. She spoke of a world that was a darker place without her light in it. The case of Eleanor Vance served as a chilling reminder that the greatest dangers do not always come from strangers lurking in the shadows. Sometimes they come from the people we know and trust the most, hidden behind a familiar smile. Her story is a tragedy of a life cut short by greed, and a friendship that was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. Detective Miller, who had kept Eleanor's picture on his desk for years, finally took it down. The case that had haunted him was closed, but the resolution brought him no sense of triumph, only a profound sadness for the senseless loss of a vibrant young woman and the deep, lasting pain it had caused her loved ones. The silence that had begun on a Tuesday morning had finally been explained, but it could never be truly broken. For the community she had worked so hard to improve, Eleanor's legacy lived on. The community garden project she had designed was completed in her honor. It became a beautiful, thriving green space in the heart of the city, a living memorial to her vision and her spirit. It was a small measure of permanence in the face of an irreversible loss. The investigation had been a long and winding road, filled with frustrating dead ends and moments of despair. It was a testament to the persistence of law enforcement and the crucial role that seemingly small details can play. A flickering taillight, a dropped cufflink, a neighbor's faint memory of a raised voice. These were the threads that, when woven together, finally unraveled a killer's intricate web of deceit. The story also highlighted the profound impact of scientific advancement on solving crimes. Without the ability to match soil samples and analyze microscopic traces of evidence, Julian Croft might have gotten away with murder. Forensic science had given a voice to a victim who could no longer speak for herself, ensuring that the truth of her final moments was brought into the light. Julian Croft's betrayal was a central theme that resonated throughout the trial and its aftermath. Friends and colleagues who had supported him, who had searched alongside him, were forced to reevaluate their memories. They recalled small instances of his manipulative behavior, his tendency to subtly borrow money, his charm that often felt performative. In hindsight, the warning signs were there, but they were obscured by the trust they had placed in him. The story of the burner phone remained a chilling detail. It demonstrated a level of cold calculation that was hard to comprehend. Julian had not killed in a moment of spontaneous rage. He had planned his actions. He had purchased the phone with the specific intent of creating a communication channel that could not be traced, a clear indication of premeditation. This fact was instrumental in securing the first-degree murder conviction. The role of the key witnesses also underscored the importance of community involvement in solving crimes. The elderly neighbor who heard the argument, the truck driver who saw the suspicious car, their small contributions were vital. It was a powerful reminder that even the most seemingly insignificant observation can become a critical piece of the puzzle when placed in the proper context. It encouraged citizens to trust their instincts and report anything that feels out of place. The emotional toll on Eleanor's family was immeasurable. They had endured the agony of not knowing her fate for nearly a year, a period of limbo filled with a torturous mixture of hope and fear. The discovery of her remains, while providing a definitive answer, brought a new and different kind of pain. Their journey through the legal system, forced to listen to the gruesome details of their daughter's death and face her killer in court, was a testament to their strength and their love for Eleanor. In prison, Julian Croft never admitted his guilt. He maintained his innocence, filing multiple appeals over the years, all of which were denied. He became a forgotten figure, just another inmate in a vast correctional system. His life, once filled with ambition and social connections, was reduced to the monotonous routine of a maximum security facility. The life he had killed to protect was, in the end, lost anyway. The case left a lasting mark on the detectives who had worked it. For Detective Chen, it was a formative experience early in his career, teaching him the value of digital forensics and relentless, methodical investigation. For Detective Miller, it was one of the final major cases before his retirement, a somber capstone to a long career. He often said that of all the cases he had worked, this one stayed with him the most, a stark illustration of the darkness that can hide in plain sight. The community garden, named the Vance Memorial Garden, became a local landmark. Schools brought children there for educational programs, and community groups held events on its lawns. It was a place of life and growth, a stark contrast to the violence and decay that had marked the end of its creator's life. In this way, Eleanor's work outlived her, continuing to bring beauty and nourishment to the world. The media's role in the case was complex. While their initial coverage was instrumental in raising public awareness and generating tips, the sensationalism during the trial was a source of additional pain for the family. The case became a commodity, a story to be sold. Yet, it was also through a cold case documentary that the key witness, the truck driver, was prompted to finally call the police, highlighting the media's potential to jog memories and bring new information to light, even years after the fact. The legal proceedings also revealed the meticulous nature of building a circumstantial case. With no confession and no eyewitness to the murder itself, the prosecution had to construct a narrative brick by brick from dozens of smaller pieces of evidence. Each piece, on its own, might have been explainable. But together, they formed an unbreakable chain that linked Julian Croft to the crime, proving his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. One of the lingering questions was whether Julian's wife had known more than she let on. While she was never charged as an accessory, a cloud of suspicion remained. Had she truly been deceived by his lies? Or had she willfully ignored the signs of his guilt to protect her own comfortable life? It was a question that could never be definitively answered, adding another layer of unresolved tragedy to the story. The story of Eleanor Vance is ultimately one of profound loss. It is the story of a promising life extinguished for the most selfish of reasons. It is a story of trust betrayed and of a community rocked by the discovery of a killer in their midst. But it is also a story of resilience, the resilience of a family that fought for justice, of detectives who refused to give up, and of a community that chose to honor a life by nurturing the beauty she had left behind. What happened to Eleanor Vance reminds us that justice is not always swift, and the path to truth is often long and arduous. It is a process that requires patience, skill, and sometimes a bit of luck. The cufflink in the woods, the flickering taillight in the night. These were the small twists of fate that prevented a perfect crime from remaining perfect. They ensured that a killer would be held accountable and that a victim's story would be told. If you found this case compelling, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on similar true crime investigations. Until next time, stay aware, stay compassionate, and look out for one another.